I don't know why I'm even talking about this now. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's fear. Or maybe I just need someone, anyone, to tell me I didn't completely destroy someone's family. You know that feeling when you do something you believe is right in the moment, but then you wake up the next day and your stomach just drops. That's me right now. It's like I've swallowed a stone that won't move. I keep replaying last night over and over again in my head. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the pumpkin lights glowing in the backyard. It was supposed to be a normal Halloween get-together. Friends, drinks, costumes, all the usual suburban cheer. But behind every smile, there's always something unspoken, right? Something that cracks through the laughter if you look hard enough. I didn't see it then. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. I've been married to Vince for 10 years now. He's my rock. Quiet, level-headed, always the voice of reason when I get too emotional. And then there's his best friend, Brady. God, Brady is one of those people who just fills a room. Funny, charming, effortlessly good with people. I liked him right away, and honestly, I think everyone does. He's the kind of guy who remembers your dog's name, who brings an extra bottle of wine, just in case. And then there's his daughter, Kali. Kali is 16 now, but she's always been kind of an old soul. Sweet, smart, with that spark teenage girls have before life tries to dull it. Brady adores her. You can see it when he talks about her. Every word is dipped in pride. She's my kiddo, he'd say, eyes lighting up like he'd personally created the sun. And I loved seeing that. It reminded me that there are still good dads out there, men who actually show up. Then came Morgan. Brady met her maybe a year and a half ago. I remember the first dinner we all had together. Her voice was loud, her laugh even louder. Not bad things, just different. I don't know how to describe it without sounding judgmental. She was blunt, unfiltered, the kind of person who could make you uncomfortable and fascinated at the same time. I didn't dislike her, not exactly, but we were oil and water from the start. She didn't go to college, she worked as a hairstylist. And she had this way of making me feel like I was too polished. Like she could see right through the layers I've built to keep myself in control. Vince says I can be a little uptight. He's not wrong. But Morgan, she just had this rawness that didn't mix with my world. Still, I respected her, especially when she got pregnant with their baby girl. And honestly, I thought she was doing great. She seemed to adore Kali, always posting pictures with her, buying her matching outfits with the baby, telling everyone how much she lucked out with a stepdaughter like her. So when I overheard what I did last night, it didn't even register at first. The party was winding down. A few people had already left. The candy bowl was mostly wrappers. Morgan and I were sitting on the porch with half-empty glasses of wine, our legs wrapped in throw blankets, the October air biting a little. She was tipsy, not slurring, but loose enough that the truth had started to slip between her jokes. We were talking about Kali, just casual stuff at first. College plans, boys, how she wanted to study journalism. Morgan laughed, this sharp little sound, and said, I can't wait for her to graduate and move out. I thought she was joking. I even laughed and said something like, oh come on, Brady's gonna miss her too much. He'd probably build her a room in the garage just to keep her close. But then Morgan looked at me, really looked, and smirked. Yeah, she said, swirling her wine. Well, I'm working on that. I should have dropped it. I should have just nodded and moved on. But something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Maybe it was the smirk, or the quiet little bitterness underneath her tone. So I asked, what do you mean? That's when she started. At first it was small complaints. Kali being messy, always leaving her makeup in the bathroom, taking long showers. Then it got darker. She said she was tired of feeling like she had to compete with Brady's first family. That no matter what she did, Kali would always be the favorite. She said she wanted Brady's attention, to herself and for their baby to grow up as the center of his world, not living in Kali's shadow. And then she said it. The part that's been echoing in my head since last night. I'm gonna make sure we move after she graduates, she said. A smaller place. Somewhere with no extra room. She can figure it out with her mom. She's not living with us forever. I remember just sitting there, frozen. I couldn't tell if I was angry or just horrified. She said it so casually, like she was talking about redecorating a room. Not a girl's life. Not Brady's daughter. The night ended soon after. People left. Morgan kissed Brady goodnight like nothing happened. But I couldn't shake it. I was cleaning up candy wrappers, empty bottles, and her words just kept repeating in my head like a broken record. So I did something impulsive. Something I can't take back. I grabbed my phone, opened Discord, because that's how Brady and I usually joke around about game nights. And I told him every word, and the moment I hit send, my chest felt lighter. For about 5 seconds. Then the dread hit me. Because what if she trusted me? What if I'd just blown up their marriage? But what if she really meant it? What if she'd actually push Kali away, break her heart? The moment I saw the little green circle light up beside Brady's name, my heart dropped into my stomach. He was online. I hadn't even expected him to respond right away. It was nearly midnight, and I figured he'd read it in the morning when things were calmer, maybe after a cup of coffee. But no. Within seconds, his typing bubble appeared. Those 3 little dots. I swear I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Wait, what? She said that. Just 5 words. But I knew, right then, that I'd opened a door I couldn't close. I started typing, deleting, retyping, trying to sound calm, neutral, like I wasn't throwing Morgan under the bus. Yeah, I wrote back. I just thought you should know. Maybe she didn't mean it how it sounded, but it really bothered me. No response for 2 minutes. Then, she's sleeping right now. I'll talk to her in the morning. And then nothing. I sat there, staring at the chat screen, my hand trembling around my phone. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the dishwasher. Vince had already gone upstairs, probably assuming I was just scrolling social media. I wanted to go to bed, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What had I done? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Morgan's smirk, heard the bitterness in her voice, replayed the sound of Brady's message notification. By the time morning came, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. My reflection looked like I'd been crying even though I hadn't shed a tear. Just those red, sleepless eyes and that dry, heavy feeling behind them. Vince came down around 8 a.m., freshly showered, coffee in hand, looking like someone who still had control over his life. He took one look at me and frowned. "What's wrong?" I told him. All of it, word for word. The porch, the wine, Morgan's confession, and then the message. He didn't interrupt me once, just stared, eyebrows pulled together, lips tight, the way he does when he's trying not to react too soon. When I finally finished, he sighed, a deep, heavy exhale that sounded more disappointed than angry. "Harper," he said quietly, "you can't just insert yourself into people's marriages like that." I blinked at him, stunned. "What?" "Vince, she literally said she's planning to push Brady's daughter out of the house. How could I not tell him? I'm not saying you're wrong to be concerned, he said, setting his mug down. But Morgan probably thought she was venting. You two were drinking. You were friends in that moment. You crossed a line. Friends? I snapped. She's not my friend. I'm not going to protect girl code when a 16-year-old kid's future is being planned away. Like a piece of furniture. He rubbed his temples. I get it. But you might have just lit a fuse that's gonna blow up their family. You should have told me first. That stung. Because he was right. He always is. But hearing it still felt like a slap. I wanted to believe I'd done the right thing. That I'd protected Kali from a stepmother who didn't truly want her around. But deep down, a tiny, uncomfortable part of me knew Vince was right too. I should have waited. The day crawled by like it was deliberately punishing me. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach flipped. Around noon, it finally happened. A new message from Brady. I talked to her. My hands shook as I typed back. And she admitted she said it. Tried to say she was drunk and didn't mean it. But she did. I could tell. We fought. Bad. She left with the baby. Went to her sister's. I froze. My throat went dry. I'd expected anger. Maybe denial. But not that. Not this. Brady, I didn't mean for. No. I'm glad you told me. I needed to know. Thank you. I stared at the screen. But instead of relief, I felt something else crawl through me. Guilt. A thick, suffocating guilt that clung to my ribs. Because even if he said thank you, his words felt like the kind people say when they're still trying to convince themselves it's true. Vince came home early that day. He didn't say much. Just asked, "Did you hear from him?" And when I nodded, his jaw tightened. "You should give them space," he said. "Don't text either of them. Let them sort it out." But I couldn't. Not completely. I checked Morgan's social media. I know. It's awful. And she'd posted a picture that morning. A car seat in the back of her sister's car. The caption, "Some people should learn to mind their own damn business." I felt the blood drain from my face. That post wasn't just a coincidence. She was talking about me, and maybe she was right. Because the thing is, she hadn't just lost an argument. She'd left her home, packed up her baby, and drove off because of something I set in motion. That night, I told myself over and over again that I was protecting a child, that I'd done the moral thing. But when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was Morgan's eyes that night. Tired, drunk, frustrated, and whether she just needed someone to listen. What if she wasn't plotting anything? What if she was just venting after a long week, the way I've done 100 times about Vince? What if I'd turned a moment of weakness into a weapon? I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. Because sometimes, when you tell a truth too soon, or to the wrong person, it doesn't just reveal secrets, it creates them. The following week felt like living in a fog. You know those days when everything looks normal from the outside, but inside, something feels off. That was me. I still went to work, still cooked dinner, still laughed at Vince's jokes, but I wasn't there. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse jumped. Every time Vince's phone lit up, I wondered if it was Brady. But there was nothing. No new messages. No calls. No updates. Just silence. I told myself that silence meant things were settling down. That maybe they'd talked it out. Maybe Morgan would come home. Maybe life would quietly return to normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Because people don't just forget when something like that happens. They don't forget who started it. 3 days later, Vince got a call. He was in his office when I heard his voice change. Softer, slower. Then he came out, pale. That was Brady, he said. I put my mug down. What did he say? He rubbed the back of his neck. They're taking a break. Morgan's staying at her sister's for now. He's got Kali full-time again. My stomach twisted. I wanted to say I'm sorry, but it felt hollow. Because sorry doesn't fix a marriage. Sorry doesn't unsay the truth. Then Vince said something that hit me harder than anything else. He asked me to tell you he's grateful, but he also said he needs space. For both of you. Space? I repeated, my voice small. Yeah. He said it's not personal. He just needs time to figure things out. But it was personal. It always is. That night, I sat alone on the couch while Vince took a shower. The house was quiet except for the sound of running water upstairs. My phone screen glowed in the dark. I opened Instagram again, half hoping, half dreading what I'd see. Morgan had posted again. A picture of her baby sleeping, captioned, "She deserves peace, not drama." It wasn't even subtle this time. And the comments were full of sympathy. Stay strong, mama. You're doing the right thing. Cut toxic people out of your life. I scrolled through everyone, my chest tightening. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Toxic people. That's who I was now. The villain in someone else's story. That night I barely slept again. I'd close my eyes and hear Morgan's voice, mocking me in my head. Some people should mind their own business. By morning, Vince had noticed. You've got to let it go, Harp, he said gently. You did what you thought was right. But what if I didn't? I whispered. What if I just made everything worse? He hesitated, then kissed my forehead. Then that's on them to fix, not you. But I couldn't believe that, because even if I wasn't directly involved anymore, I was the reason the cracks were showing. I had started it. A few days later, I saw Brady again. He came by to drop off something Vince had lent him. An old power washer, I think. I didn't even know he was coming until I looked out the window and saw his car. My heart nearly stopped. When I opened the door, he smiled. But it wasn't the same smile. It was strained, tired, the kind people give when they're pretending everything's okay. Hey, he said. Hey, I echoed. My throat was dry. How are you? He shrugged. Hanging in there. It's been a week. I wanted to hug him, to tell him I never meant to cause this. But before I could say anything, he added quietly, Kali's okay, though. She's happy I'm home more. His eyes softened when he said her name. But there was something else there too. A flicker of sadness. Or maybe regret. Then he said, Morgan's still mad. Says I betrayed her. Says you and I planned this together. My chest tightened. That's not true. I know, he said quickly, cutting me off. I know you didn't mean any harm. But she's furious. She thinks you wanted her out of the picture. I shook my head. God, no. Brady, I swear. He raised a hand gently. I believe you, but I think you should stay out of it now. Please. For everyone's sake. That please wasn't a request. It was a warning wrapped in kindness. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. It was one of those moments when everything feels still, but not peaceful, just suspended. Like time itself is waiting for the next mistake. Over the next week, things got worse. Morgan started avoiding me in every social circle. She unfollowed me online, stopped showing up to gatherings, even skipped the monthly couples dinner we'd always done as a group. Friends noticed. Questions started floating around. Did something happen between you two? I brushed it off. saying we just drifted. But the looks lingered. People knew something was off. Then one morning, I woke up to a message from an unknown number. You really don't know when to shut up, do you? No name. Just that. I froze. My fingers went cold. Vince was still asleep beside me, so I didn't tell him. Maybe it was nothing, a prank, or maybe Morgan's sister trying to scare me. But the words, they felt heavy, real. That day at work, I couldn't focus. Every noise made me jump. Every stranger's glance made me wonder if they knew. That night, when I got home, Vince noticed how tense I was. You okay? He asked. I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. But the truth was, I wasn't tired. I was scared. Because guilt doesn't just eat at your conscience. Sometimes it grows teeth. And the more you try to bury it, the more it finds ways to bite back. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. Every little sound made me flinch. The ding of a notification, the slam of a car door, even the rustle of leaves outside the window. It's like the world had grown louder just to remind me that I'd set something in motion I couldn't control. Then the messages started again. Not every day, but enough to make my stomach coil in dread each time my phone vibrated. Some lessons are learned the hard way. No number, no sender. Just words that made my chest tighten, made my hands shake. I wanted to tell Vince, but how could I? The first time I had intervened, things had already spiraled. If I told him now, he might blame me again. Or worse, I might drag him into Morgan's wrath. So I stayed quiet, pretending everything was normal. While inside I was unraveling. A few nights later, Vince and I had a rare quiet evening at home. The kind where you think you can breathe, where the world feels like it's pausing for a second. I was sitting on the couch, staring at the darkened living room, when my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. You should have stayed out of it. Now you're part of the problem. I could feel the panic rising. My palms were slick, my fingers trembling. Vince noticed immediately. What's wrong? He asked, leaning closer. I shook my head, too ashamed to tell him. Nothing, I muttered. But he wasn't convinced. Not for a second. You're hiding something, he said gently but firmly. Harper, talk to me. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, to confess that maybe I'd gone too far, that I'd stirred up more than I'd realized. But the words got caught in my throat, because admitting the truth meant accepting that I might have destroyed something, maybe even a family. Days later, I ran into Brady again, at Vince's office where he'd come to pick up a tool. The tension was thicker this time. I could see it in his eyes, the strain, the exhaustion. We exchanged polite words, but the silence between them screamed. It's complicated, he said finally, voice tight. Morgan, she's not ready to forgive, and I don't know when she will be. I nodded mutely, heart pounding. I wanted to reach out, to say, I'm sorry, I never wanted this, but I didn't. Because what if my apology just made things worse? By then, I realized I was being watched, not in a creepy sense, but in that subtle, suffocating way where someone's attention is so focused on you that you feel every step you take is under scrutiny. Every social media post I made, every story I shared, every comment I liked. I felt like I was under a microscope. And maybe I was. It all came to a head one Friday evening. I'd gone to the grocery store alone, Vince at work. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and the parking lot was almost empty. My phone buzzed. A single message. Stop pretending. Face what you've done. My fingers froze around the cart handle. My breathing quickened. I could feel tears stinging my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I was scared. Really scared. I hurried to my car, locked the doors, and just sat there, staring at the dashboard. Every rational part of me told me it was probably Morgan, or her sister, or someone trying to intimidate me. But a small, insidious part whispered that it could be anyone. That somehow, by revealing her secret, I'd opened a door I could never close. By the time I got home, I was shaking. Vince saw immediately. "Harper, what's going on?" he asked. I couldn't lie anymore. Not fully. I told him about the messages, the growing sense of fear, and the tension that had wrapped itself around me like a vice. He put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't just reassuring me. He was scared too, because he knew how far this had gone. How tangled we all were in a mess that wasn't ours to control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining Morgan's smirk, Brady's strained smile, the quiet fury simmering somewhere in the house I wasn't allowed in. I thought about Kali, oblivious, innocent, and I wondered how much of this she'd even notice. And then it hit me. The moral of everything I'd done. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't make you a hero. Sometimes, it makes you the villain. And the real question lingered, louder than my fear. Had I crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? Because once you speak, once you intervene, once you reveal a truth meant to protect, you can't take it back. Not really. You can't control what the other person does with it. You can't control how they feel, how they react, how the fallout spreads. It started with a knock. A single, deliberate knock on my front door late one evening. I froze mid-step, heart hammering. Vince was out running errands, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The kind of quiet that makes every little sound feel amplified. I peeked through the peephole. Morgan stood there, her arms crossed, eyes sharp, cheeks flushed from the cool night air. I swallowed hard and opened the door, trying to appear calm. "Harper," she said, voice low, controlled, almost a hiss. "We need to talk." I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. My chest was tight, my palms slick. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. She didn't sit, didn't even make a gesture, just stood there staring. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she asked. Her words weren't loud, but they hit me like a slap. Morgan, I didn't mean," I started, but she cut me off. Didn't mean?" She repeated, incredulous. "You've turned everything upside down. Brady barely sleeps. Kali's confused. And you," she pointed at me, sharp as a knife. "You think you're protecting someone. You think you're a hero, but you're a child-wrecking, marriage-breaking intruder." I felt my throat close. "I only told Brady what you said. I was worried about Kali." "I didn't. Worried about Kali." She barked. "You're worried about your sense of morality, about feeling justified. And now I'm left picking up the pieces." I shook my head, tears starting to form. I couldn't just let her be hurt. "You were planning to push her out." "That's not right." Morgan's eyes softened for a second, just a flash, and then hardened again. "Harper, do you even know what it's like to be me? To have a daughter, to try to make a home, to feel like everything you do is measured against someone else who isn't even here anymore?" I love Kali. I've always loved her. But yes, sometimes, yes, I feel invisible. I blinked, shocked. Her voice cracked slightly, the fury giving way to exhaustion, pain, and something I didn't expect. Vulnerability. I just needed him to see me too," she whispered. And suddenly, everything hit me. All the judgment I'd felt toward her, all the fear and moral certainty I'd carried. It was more complicated than I thought. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't evil. She was just human. Flawed, frustrated, desperate. And in that desperation, I had lit a match. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to make her understand I never intended this chaos. And eventually, the words spilled out, quiet and trembling. "I'm sorry, Morgan. I didn't mean to make things worse. I wanted to protect Kali." Her eyes softened again, and she let out a long, shaky breath. I know you thought you were helping. But next time, don't get involved. Let us fight our battles our way." I nodded, the weight on my chest finally starting to lift, though it didn't disappear entirely. That night, when she left, I sat back down on the couch. Vince still out, the house dark and quiet. I felt a strange mixture of relief, guilt, and exhaustion. I had confronted the storm, and yet, the storm wasn't over. Because truth, once unleashed, doesn't vanish. It lingers, shadows your every step, and forces you to reckon with not just what you did, but who you are. And I realized something vital that night. Courage isn't just about doing the right thing. It's about knowing when to step back. It's about recognizing the delicate threads of human relationships and understanding that even well-intentioned actions can unravel them. I had crossed a line. I had learned that the hard way. And even if Morgan forgave me, even if Brady forgave me, even if the house returned to something like normal, I could never fully unsee what my own impulses had caused. The lesson settled into me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Some truths are dangerous. Some interventions are reckless. And sometimes, the people you think you're protecting don't need saving. They just need space to fight their own battles. I didn't sleep much that night either. But for the first time in a week, it wasn't pure panic. It was reflection, understanding, the quiet, painful kind of wisdom that comes from realizing how little control you actually have over the people you care about most. And as dawn crept through the curtains, I made a silent vow. I would never let my fear or my sense of justice dictate someone else's family again. I would listen, I would observe, and I would choose my battles carefully, because some battles, no matter how noble they seem, are not yours to fight. The days after the confrontation felt strange, different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Morgan had returned home, Brady was calmer, and Kali was blissfully unaware of the storm that had almost torn her family apart. Life continued, but for me, nothing would ever be exactly the same. I tried to go back to my normal routine. I cooked dinner with Vince, laughed at his terrible puns, checked emails, folded laundry. Outwardly, I looked like Harper, composed, married, living an ordinary suburban life. But inside, I felt like a different person. My own reflection startled me. I had seen the consequences of a single, impulsive act, and I had lived through its chaos. Brady reached out once more, casually, to invite Vince and me to a barbecue. He smiled at me warmly, though there was caution in his eyes. That was fine. I understood. I had crossed a line. The trust I thought I had with him had shifted, subtly but permanently. And Morgan, she didn't speak to me directly for another few weeks. The tension wasn't anger anymore. It was wariness, a quiet reminder that boundaries exist for a reason. Through it all, I realized something I hadn't expected. My intentions didn't matter as much as I thought they did. I had genuinely tried to protect Kali. to be the voice of reason when I overheard something disturbing. But intentions are invisible, and actions are not. Actions carry consequences, whether we intend them to or not. And sometimes, the consequences fall on everyone around you, not just the people you hope to protect. Vince and I talked late one night, after Kali had left with her dad for the weekend. The house was quiet, our small kitchen lit by a single lamp. I poured him a cup of tea, and he reached across the table to hold my hand. "You did what you thought was right," he said gently. "I know that, but maybe next time, trust me to handle it first." I nodded, the lump in my throat growing. "I know. I thought I was helping, but I see now how fragile these relationships are. How delicate. I almost destroyed more than I helped." He squeezed my hand. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do next." And that was the lesson I would carry with me forever. Knowing when to act and knowing when to step back is one of the hardest things to master, especially when emotions are high, alcohol is involved, and family ties are complicated. I started to reflect on Morgan too. I realized she wasn't a villain. She was a person, just like me, who was trying to balance her life, her insecurities, and her love for a daughter who wasn't biologically hers. The same way I had loved and feared for someone else's child, she loved and feared for hers. The difference was perspective, and the fact that I had chosen to intervene. It haunted me sometimes, how easy it is to misunderstand someone's intentions, to think you know their heart when all you see is a fragment of their reality. I had assumed the worst, and for a moment, that assumption had ignited chaos. It was a harsh reminder that empathy isn't just about feeling. It's about listening, observing, and respecting the boundaries of others' lives. Weeks passed, and slowly, the household rhythms returned to something resembling normal. Vince and I laughed again without guilt lurking in the shadows. Brady's smiles came easier, though a trace of caution lingered, invisible but present. Morgan and I could coexist again in group settings, our interactions polite, careful, neutral. And Kali? She remained bright, unaffected, and blissfully unaware of the tension that had erupted around her. But the experience left a mark, a quiet, enduring awareness of the ripple effects of our choices. I learned that sometimes courage is not in speaking out, but in knowing when your words might hurt more than they help. That good intentions do not automatically equal good outcomes. That boundaries exist not to limit us, but to protect everyone involved. I still think about that night, about the wine, the porch, Morgan's smirk, and the words I relayed. I still remember Brady's gratitude mixed with exhaustion and Vince's quiet disappointment. And sometimes, I catch myself imagining a world where I stayed silent, where the night's tension never existed. Would things have been better? Maybe. Would I have slept easier? Probably. But the truth is, life doesn't give us maybe. Only what we do with the moments we choose to act or not act, and so, I live with it. The guilt, the lessons, the quiet understanding that some truths are too dangerous to speak, and some battles aren't ours to fight. But I also live with hope. Hope that my actions, even flawed, taught me empathy. That they reminded me to observe before intervening, to listen before acting. That they sharpened my sense of what it means to truly care about people, even when caring might demand restraint, because in the end, love, protection, and morality are complicated. They aren't clear-cut, neat, or easy. And sometimes, the hardest choice is the one that seems like doing nothing, even when doing nothing feels impossible. I still replay that night sometimes, not with panic anymore, but with reflection. I wonder how Kali will remember these years. how Morgan and Brady will navigate their blended family, and how I fit into the periphery of their lives. I can't control any of it, but I can control my own actions moving forward. And that's what I intend to do, carefully, thoughtfully, with empathy, with the hard-earned knowledge that sometimes saying less is the bravest thing you can do. Call to action CTA. If you were in this situation, what would you do? Would you speak up to protect someone, or stay silent to preserve the balance of a family? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective might help someone else navigate a moral dilemma like mine. And if you want more gripping, emotional, and suspenseful real-life stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Some nights, long after everyone else has gone to bed, I sit alone in my living room with a mug of tea, staring at the dim glow of the lamp and thinking about the choices I've made. There's a certain kind of quiet that forces reflection. The silence isn't peaceful. It's relentless. It doesn't let you hide. It just waits, like a mirror that can't lie. I keep thinking about Kali, 16, smart, funny, fiercely loyal to her dad. I remember the first time I met her. She was shy, clutching her phone, a little wary of the new people in her father's life. And I remember thinking, she's going to be okay. She has Brady, she has love. But now, after last week's chaos, I realize that even the strongest bonds can be shaken. I think about Morgan, too. It's easy to look at someone and judge them, to reduce their complexity to a few surface traits. Loud laugh, blunt words, rough edges. But Morgan's strength and her love for her family were never in question. Her flaws are human, as much as mine are. And it's human nature to protect your space, to want recognition, to feel unseen when you're doing your best. That night, I saw the part of her most people never see, the vulnerability hidden beneath the fire. And I realized that empathy isn't easy. It's complicated. It's sitting with someone's truth even when it's uncomfortable and messy. I think about my own actions, about that impulsive decision to message Brady. I can justify it 100 ways. I was worried for Kali. I was disturbed by Morgan's words. I believed in protecting a child. But the truth? I acted without considering the consequences fully. I allowed emotion to override reason. And the results were chaos. The realization isn't easy to sit with. I imagine the ripple effect. Brady exhausted, Morgan hurt, Vince caught in the middle, and me, realizing that my moral compass isn't always aligned with reality. Sometimes, good intentions can cause harm. Sometimes, the right thing isn't the loud, immediate action. It's restraint. And yet, I can't ignore the lessons I've learned from this. I've learned that courage isn't just about action. It's about understanding, about holding back when your heart screams forward. I've learned that empathy is listening before speaking, observing before judging. And I've learned that boundaries are sacred, not to limit connection, but to preserve trust. Sometimes I replay the conversations over and over. Vince, sitting calmly, trying to keep me grounded. Brady, tired but grateful. Morgan, furious, hurt, yet vulnerable in ways only a few people ever see. And me, a witness to it all, caught between right and wrong, action and inaction, moral obligation and respect for others' autonomy. I can't help but imagine how things could have gone differently. What if I had stayed silent? Would Morgan have moved forward as she intended? Would Kali have experienced hardship? Or would life have continued seamlessly, unaffected by my interference? Or what if I had done nothing and something had gone wrong? The possibilities are endless, terrifying, and humbling. There's a strange kind of growth that comes from mistakes like this. A quiet, almost painful awakening that you're not omnipotent, that you can't fix everything, that life will challenge your intentions, and that you are never the sole author of another person's story. Even now, weeks later, I still notice the tension. Morgan and I coexist in social situations, our interactions polite, careful. Brady is cordial, wary, but protective of his daughter. Vince and I navigate the subtle shifts in trust, and I live with the knowledge that even well-meaning actions carry weight, that some truths are too fragile to speak, and that the people we care about most don't always need saving. Sometimes they need space. I've begun to journal again, to write down my reflections, my emotions, the guilt, the fear, the small victories of understanding. Writing it down feels like exhaling, like slowly releasing the pressure that built up inside me. And in those pages, I confront the truth I can't escape. Morality is not a straight line, and the heart is not a compass that always points north. I've started to notice the little things again, the way Kali laughs with her dad, the subtle way Brady's eyes soften when he talks about her, Vince's quiet smiles at small domestic victories, even Morgan's soft gestures toward her baby. Life continues, relationships evolve, pain lingers, but so does understanding, and slowly, I've come to accept something vital. Responsibility isn't just about action, it's about reflection, about examining your motives, understanding consequences, and acknowledging mistakes without letting them define you completely. I still think about that night on the porch, the wine, the conversation that spiraled out of control. I still hear Morgan's voice, sharp but vulnerable. I still remember Brady's exhaustion and gratitude, Vince's quiet disappointment, and my own tremors of fear and guilt. But I don't relive it with panic anymore. I relive it with insight, caution, and empathy, and that insight has changed me. I know I'll never act recklessly again, even with the best of intentions. I know that some truths are dangerous to speak, and some battles aren't mine to fight. And I know that love, morality, and protection are complicated, messy, and infinitely nuanced. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong. It's between intervening and letting go. And I've learned, in the deepest, most humbling way possible, that letting go is sometimes the most courageous act of all. There are moments in life when the weight of your choices presses down on you like a physical force, a suffocating heaviness that seeps into your bones. Even now, months later, I feel it sometimes, in quiet corners, when the house is dark and Vince is asleep, when the world seems still but my mind refuses to stop. I think about the night of the Halloween gathering, how casual it all seemed at first. Wine, laughter, costumes, playful banter. I thought it was harmless. I thought it was fun. I didn't see the thread of tension weaving itself between us, tightening silently until it could snap. Morgan had been tipsy, true, but she had also been honest in a way that only comes when your defenses are down. And I, driven by my own sense of justice, listened too closely. I pried, nudged, asked questions. I sought clarity, but instead, I unleashed something I couldn't control. It's strange how easy it is to justify the decisions that lead to chaos. How easily our intentions convince us we're right. But intentions are invisible. Consequences are not. The ripple effect of that one conversation has followed me ever since. I remember picking up my phone that night to message Brady. My fingers shook as I typed, erased, typed again. Each word was a gamble, a question. Do I do the right thing, or do I protect my own peace? I convinced myself I was doing the moral thing. But morality isn't always simple. Morality isn't always clear. Brady's response had been immediate but cautious. Gratitude wrapped in exhaustion. And I felt relief at first. a fleeting sense of having done the right thing. But then the guilt set in, heavy, insistent, impossible to ignore. Vince had been right. I should have waited. I should have let him handle it. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, one that leaves scars in the form of what-ifs. What if I hadn't messaged Brady? Would Morgan and I have avoided confrontation? Would the family's equilibrium have remained intact? Or would unspoken resentment have simmered, eventually exploding in ways I couldn't imagine? I replay the confrontation with Morgan endlessly in my mind. Her eyes, sharp with anger, softened for a fleeting moment. Her voice, fierce and cutting, gave way to vulnerability. That's the part that haunts me most. The raw humanity beneath the fire. She wasn't a villain. She was someone struggling with her insecurities, her desire for recognition, her love for a child who wasn't her own. And in that struggle, I became the intruder. There's a lesson there I carry every day. Empathy is complicated. It's not about judging actions or words. It's about understanding the depth of human emotion, the layers beneath the surface, and the invisible battles people fight in silence. Sometimes, I still feel the tension when I see Morgan. In social settings, our interactions are polite, careful, almost fragile. There's no anger anymore. Not really, but the awareness of what happened lingers. It's a silent acknowledgement that boundaries were crossed, trust was tested, and lives were briefly unbalanced because of one impulsive act. And yet, I also feel hope. Hope that the lesson has settled into everyone's hearts as it has into mine. Brady and Morgan navigate their family with renewed clarity. Kali, thankfully, remains happy, bright, and largely unaware of the storms she was nearly caught in. Vince and I, though changed, are closer in understanding the importance of restraint, trust, and communication. I also think about myself. I've grown. I've learned the weight of words, the danger of assumptions, the fragility of relationships. I've learned to pause before acting, to listen before speaking, to consider before intervening. And perhaps most importantly, I've learned that love, for a child, for a spouse, for friends, does not always demand action. Sometimes, the bravest act of love is stepping back. And yet, even with these lessons, I cannot escape the memory of that night completely. The wine, the laughter, the casual conversation that turned confessional, the sense of morality pressing me to act, the trembling of my hands as I sent that message, the chaos that followed. I realized that life is rarely black and white. People are rarely purely good or evil. Decisions are rarely simple. And consequences have a way of stretching farther than we imagine, touching lives in ways we can never fully predict. The fear I felt in those weeks, the anonymous messages, the tension, the silent confrontations, has faded. But the lesson remains vivid, and it has changed me profoundly. One approach relationships differently now. I observe more. I question less. I act with caution, empathy, and respect for the autonomy of others. And in the quiet, reflective moments, I whispered to myself, I did what I thought was right. I learned what was hardest, and I will never forget that the line between helping and harming is thinner than I ever imagined. Some nights, the memories come uninvited. I wake in the dark, heart racing, and I hear Morgan's voice again. Not the polite, controlled tone after our confrontation. The sharp, almost accusatory edge from that night on the porch. I can still feel it cutting through me. You think you're helping, but you're hurting everyone. I see Brady's exhausted eyes. The way he tried to balance anger and gratitude. How he carried the burden of Morgan's frustrations while trying to remain the protective father. I knew he was. I see Vince too. caught between his best friend and his wife, trying to navigate a moral minefield I had unknowingly set in motion. And then there's me, Harper, the woman who thought she could intervene, who believed her actions were just, who acted without realizing the fragility of the lives around her. I start to replay the timeline in my mind, like a slow-motion movie. The Halloween night, the wine, the laughter, the casual conversation that turned confessional, the details Morgan shared, the complaints about Collie, her frustrations about Brady, the subtle bitterness she didn't even realize she was revealing, and me, curious, tipsy, morally compelled, leaning in, pressing for more, asking the questions that I convinced myself were harmless but weren't. I sent the message to Brady. That's the moment everything shifted. I remember the way I stared at my phone afterward, stomach twisting, palms damp, relief at the immediate acknowledgement from Brady. But the relief was fleeting. Guilt settled in, a lead weight in my chest, because I could not undo what had been said, could not take back the words I relayed, could not control how they would affect the family. The confrontation with Morgan was another revelation. I went in expecting anger, and I got it. But I also glimpsed her humanity, her vulnerability, the exhaustion of trying to claim space in a household where she felt unseen, her fierce love for her children, even when it conflicted with her insecurities. And I realized then that I had become an unexpected force in her personal struggle. I had wanted to protect Collie, but I had also disrupted Morgan's delicate balance. And so the lesson crystallized in a way that burned into me. Good intentions can cause harm. Acting on what feels morally right can sometimes create chaos. Intervening in someone else's family dynamics can ripple farther than you ever imagine. I still think about Collie, 16, brilliant, resilient, loyal to her father, and largely unaware of the drama swirling around her. I watch her laugh, watch her care for her little sister, watch the love she shares with Brady, and I realize that children are resilient, yes, but the adults who surround them are not infallible. We are flawed, impulsive, capable of both great kindness and unintentional damage. Vince has been a rock through it all, quiet, patient, observant. He didn't chastise me, not harshly, but he made me understand that intervention is a delicate art, that timing, context, and trust matter, and that the consequences of stepping in are not yours alone to bear. I still get nervous when I see Morgan. Her presence carries subtle tension, a silent reminder that boundaries were crossed, but it's tempered now with understanding and civility. Politeness masks the awareness that we both know the stakes we navigated that night. And in that quiet civility, there's a kind of fragile respect. I've learned to value observation over action, patience over immediate reaction, restraint over moral urgency. I've learned that empathy isn't just feeling for someone. It's understanding the complexity of their life, their fears, their hidden battles. And yet, the fear, the anxiety, the weight of having disrupted a family dynamic, it hasn't vanished entirely. It lingers, not in panic, but as a quiet, humbling reminder of human fragility. I've thought a lot about choices, about the thin line between helping and harming, about the ripple effects of a single, seemingly small act, about how one night, one conversation, one impulsive decision can set in motion events that touch multiple lives in profound ways. And I've thought about forgiveness, not just from Morgan, or Brady, or Vince, but from myself. It's a slow, ongoing process, recognizing that I acted from care, from fear, from moral conviction, and yet acknowledging that those very motivations carried consequences I hadn't foreseen. I journal my thoughts. I write about the fear, the guilt, the lessons, and sometimes the small victories of understanding. Writing is a release, a way to examine the contours of my conscience without judgment, a way to turn chaos into reflection. I've grown. I'm more cautious, more empathetic, more aware of how my actions ripple outward. I've learned that sometimes silence is the braver choice, that sometimes stepping back is the act of love, that sometimes protecting someone doesn't mean intervening. And yet, I carry the memory of that night with me, not as a burden, but as a guide, a constant reminder that human relationships are fragile, morality is complex, and the consequences of our actions are rarely confined to ourselves. I still ask myself questions, quietly, in the dark of the night. What would I do if it happened again? Would I act differently? Would I remain silent? Or would my heart push me forward, reckless as before? I don't know the answer yet, and perhaps that's the point. Life doesn't hand out certainty. It offers choices, consequences, and reflection. It teaches us lessons through mistakes and forces us to confront the shadow side of our intentions. And in that confrontation, I've found a strange kind of clarity. Not peace, not absolution, but understanding. Understanding that I am human, fallible, capable of care and chaos alike. That every action carries weight, and that love, protection, and morality are as much about restraint as they are about action. The weeks after the confrontation were a strange blend of calm and tension, like walking through a fog where you can see shapes but not all the edges. Life had returned to a semblance of normal, yet I could feel the aftershocks of my actions lingering in the corners of every interaction. Every glance between Brady and Morgan, every casual smile from Collie, every quiet conversation with Vince carried subtle weight, reminders of what had almost unraveled. One evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, Vince cooking dinner with the kind of ease I envied. And I thought about the first time I'd met Morgan. She had been so different back then, brash, confident, full of energy that I didn't understand. I judged her without knowing her. I had assumed she was rough around the edges, someone I wouldn't like. And now, after everything, I realized I had only seen a fraction of her truth. Morgan wasn't perfect. She had flaws, sharp edges, insecurities that sometimes manifested in frustration and anger. But she also had depth, resilience, and a fierce love for her children. And I, in my well-meaning curiosity, had overlooked all of that. I had allowed my own assumptions to guide my actions, and the consequences had been immediate and chaotic. Vince had been right all along. Intervention isn't simple. It isn't about being morally right. It's about timing, understanding, and most importantly, trust. Trust that your involvement will not destabilize the very thing you aim to protect. I hadn't considered that fully, and I had paid the price in anxiety, guilt, and sleepless nights. I remember the first weekend after the confrontation when Collie stayed over. She was oblivious to the tension, as teenagers often are. She laughed, joked with her sister, and asked for help decorating the living room for a school project. It should have been a joyful, ordinary moment, and it was, except for the undercurrent I couldn't ignore, the awareness that my actions had temporarily disturbed the natural rhythm of her life. I found myself reflecting on the fragility of human relationships, how easily they can be disrupted by one conversation, one revelation, one decision. How sometimes the best way to love someone isn't to protect them from every harm, but to allow them the space to navigate challenges themselves. I realized that my desire to intervene had been more about my need to act, to feel morally justified, than about protecting anyone else. That realization didn't make the guilt disappear. It intensified it. But it also gave me clarity. I began to see that life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning from them, understanding the depth of human emotion, and navigating the delicate balance between action and restraint. One night, Vince and I sat on the porch, the autumn air crisp, leaves rustling softly around us. He sipped his tea, looking at me with quiet patience. "You've been carrying this weight for weeks," he said. "I see it in your eyes." I nodded, staring at the horizon. "I keep thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't sent the message? What if Morgan and Brady's family had stayed unaffected? What if I had waited?" Vince took my hand. "We can't know that. All we can do is learn and move forward. You acted from care, not malice. That matters." I wanted to believe him, and I tried. But the truth was more complicated. It mattered, yes, but so did the lessons about restraint, about timing, about the unseen consequences of even the smallest actions. Over the following months, I paid closer attention to every interaction, every choice I made. I learned to listen first, observe before acting, and question my own motivations before stepping into someone else's life. I learned that good intentions alone aren't enough. I learned that empathy requires patience, humility, and respect for boundaries. And slowly, the anxiety faded. The fear of having caused irreparable harm gave way to reflection and understanding. I still think about that Halloween night, the conversation with Morgan, the messages to Brady. I still feel the tremor of responsibility, the echo of consequences. But now it's tempered with clarity. I understand my limits, my motives, and the delicate web of relationships I am part of. Kali continued to thrive, blissfully unaware of the storm her stepmother and I had weathered in her name. Brady and Morgan navigated their family dynamics with resilience and care. Vince and I grew closer, bound not just by love, but by the shared understanding of the fragility of human connections. And me? I carry the lessons with me every day. The awareness that action has consequences, that words have power, that sometimes the bravest act is restraint. The knowledge that empathy is as much about observing and understanding as it is about doing. The realization that life is messy, human relationships are fragile, and morality is complex. I still replay moments in my head, sometimes with regret, sometimes with understanding, sometimes with gratitude that the storm didn't destroy everything, and sometimes I simply breathe, knowing that even in imperfection, there is growth, insight, and the possibility of moving forward with a wiser heart. Some nights, the memories come unbidden, slipping into my mind like shadows at dusk. I lie awake in the quiet of our bedroom, Vince asleep beside me, and I see her face, Morgan's, sharp with anger one moment, soft with vulnerability the next. I replay her words, the ones that cut through me like ice, the ones that revealed her struggle, her insecurities, her fierce desire to be seen and acknowledged in a family she was still carving out. I also see Brady, tired yet patient, juggling his role as father, partner, and mediator. His eyes, carrying exhaustion but also unspoken gratitude toward me, remind me that even good intentions carry unforeseen consequences. And then there's Kali, blissfully unaware, laughing in the sun, the embodiment of innocence, resilience, and untainted joy. The more I reflect, the more I realize the weight of what I did. That night, when I decided to tell Brady what Morgan said, I crossed a threshold. I thought I was protecting, guiding, intervening for the greater good. But in reality, I had unleashed chaos into a delicate balance I didn't fully understand. I can still feel my hands trembling as I typed that message, the sense of urgency, the compulsion to act. And the relief I felt when Brady responded immediately was fleeting, replaced by the heavy, suffocating guilt that refused to leave. I remember the confrontation with Morgan vividly. Her words cut deep. "You think you're helping, but you're hurting everyone." At the time, I bristled. I wanted to argue, to defend my intentions. But deep down, I knew she was right. My moral compass had guided me into someone else's war, into a conflict that was never mine to fight. Her vulnerability, fleeting and unguarded, revealed the truth I had overlooked. She wasn't a villain. She was a person, flawed and human, struggling to find her place and her voice in a family that was evolving, and sometimes fracturing around her. And in that struggle, I had become an unexpected disruptor. The days that followed were a careful dance. Social gatherings were tense but polite. Conversations with Morgan were measured, cordial, cautious. Brady's expressions blended patience and weariness. And Vince, quiet, steady, observant, reminded me constantly of the importance of restraint, trust, and timing. Through it all, I learned the hard truth. Sometimes, courage isn't in action. Sometimes, courage is restraint. Sometimes, the act of love is stepping back, letting others navigate their own challenges, and recognizing the limits of your influence. I started documenting my reflections in a journal, capturing the subtle nuances of every conversation, every emotion, every fear that had gripped me in those weeks. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process the guilt, the anxiety, and the lessons that would otherwise haunt me endlessly. I thought about Kali often, her laughter and energy a stark contrast to the tension and fear I had carried. She reminded me of the stakes, that the innocence of a child can be easily overshadowed by adult conflicts. No matter how well-intentioned, Vince and I began having long conversations about boundaries, morality, and the weight of intervention. His calm perspective, his ability to navigate complex emotional landscapes, grounded me. He reminded me that my role was not to control, but to observe, support, and act with empathy and understanding when truly necessary. Even now, months later, I feel echoes of that night. Every subtle interaction, every glance, every decision carries a shadow of the lessons I learned. I understand now that life is rarely clear-cut, morality is rarely absolute, and love, protection, and empathy require more than just good intentions. They demand insight, patience, and humility. I've also realized that mistakes are inevitable. What matters is how you respond, how you learn, and how you carry the lessons forward. My impulsive action could have destroyed trust, disrupted a family, and created irreparable harm. Yet, by facing the consequences, reflecting deeply, and approaching relationships with newfound wisdom, I found a path toward understanding and growth. I still ask myself the hard questions. If I were in this situation again, would I intervene? Would I remain silent? Would I act out of care or ego? I don't always have answers, and perhaps that's the point. Life doesn't offer certainty. It offers reflection, choices, and the weight of consequences that shape who we are and how we navigate the world. Through it all, I've grown. I'm more cautious, more empathetic, and more aware of the fragility of human relationships. I've learned that sometimes doing nothing is the bravest, most compassionate choice. That words, once spoken, cannot be taken back, and that the heart's intentions must be balanced with wisdom and restraint. And in that quiet, reflective space, I finally feel a sense of clarity. Not absolution, not peace, but understanding, insight, a commitment to approach life, love, and relationships with the care, patience, and empathy they deserve, because the hardest lessons, the ones that leave scars, are also the ones that teach us most profoundly. They remind us of our humanity, our limitations, and the delicate balance of caring for others without overstepping. And I carry those lessons with me every day, quietly, like a shadow that guides me toward a wiser, more reflective version of myself.